Hey everyone, and welcome to part 1 of the fuel tanks for our RV-10 build. I'm going to be going over a couple of things that were missing in the instructions, as well as some different tips and tricks we learned from other builders about using Pro Seal here in the fuel tanks and what we found to be most helpful. All right, so again, we're kicking things off here with the fuel tanks, and as I mentioned in the last video, Tyler went ahead and got started on this while I was starting on the wing spars. For both the fuel tanks and the leading edges, you have to fabricate a cradle assembly using a drawing that Vans put on the outside of your crate when you got your wing kit. And the instructions for how to make this are in section 17, which is for the leading edge, but we had skipped this and we're working on the fuel tanks, which is section 18. So if you go back to 17-2 in step 4, it tells you about how to make this cradle that you're going to need for both. It tells you where you're supposed to trim everything, how to secure it together. I think we use little bits of 2x2 at the bottom there to secure it. And then along the edge of where you cut it off, it says, to line the inside face of the cradle with duct tape or weather strip. We had just a little thin soft bit of like felt tape that we lined it with, because again, you just don't want to have like the rough edge of the wood then like scratching on the outside of the tanks or the leading edges there when you're putting it in and out or moving it around in the cradle there. And so you just line it with something a little bit soft. When we went to lay this the cradle down to have it on its side so that we could work on the fuel tanks there on its side, our cradle exceeded the length of our little temporary table that we had set up. The plywood on top was too narrow for the cradle. It extended over the edge. So if we wanted to try to lay it down on its side, the skin ended up being what hit the plywood, not the cradle. And simple little fix we found for that is we just took a piece of 2x4 that we had that was longer than the length of the table and longer than the length of the cradle, and we just used some little C-clamps and clamped that down so that now when we laid down the cradle, now that cradle could then like rest on that 2x4 and have it leaning and propped up slightly. But it was a way that we found to make it work with this little temporary setup since we didn't have our big full-size workbench to be working on. Starting right here on 18-2 step 1, it says to flute and straighten all the fuel tank ribs per section 5-12. If I were to go back and do this again, I think I would deburr all of the ribs first. It says the part where it tells you to go and deburr all of the ribs comes later on in the instructions, but I would probably go back and have deburred all of them first, only because once you flute them, and especially with these ribs, they really need to be like heavily fluted, and now you've created all these little ripples in the flanges. It just made it a little bit trickier trying to go in and deburr them. And if we had done it before that and deburred them before fluting them, it's just you have that nice straight edge to work with. So I think that would be something we might do differently if we were to do it again. The other thing is, I would say to really make sure that you understand fluting and how it works and what you're trying to do before you do this. It's very important. These ribs all really needed to be fluted quite a bit, and so I did cover that in a different video. I will link it below and above so you can go back and look at it. Those are the two things I'd recommend right here off the bat with step 1. Again, me personally, I think it would have been easier for us to deburr all the ribs if we deburred them before fluting, and then really make sure that you understand what the point is of fluting, because all of these really had to be fluted quite a bit to pull them into alignment. The next thing here on step 2, you're trimming the tank stiffeners. The only thing here, I think, was that the length of the stiffeners was slightly too long for us to be able to run them through the bandsaw. I think the throat of our bandsaw is like 8 or 9 inches, and I think these were just slightly longer than that, so it didn't work. I just ended up using the snips, and actually, if you see here in the picture, it worked really well for trimming the little diagonal bits there at the ends of each of the stiffeners, because there's these little notches that you use to figure out where you're cutting, and as you can see here, it's really easy then to just line up the the snips there along between the two notches. It's like the perfect length, and you can get just like the perfectly straight line that you need between the two notches to make those little diagonal cutoffs.
I put the clicos in ahead of time so that when I turn the skin towards me to work on it, all I have to do is lay the stiffener in the skin and loosen the clico up by pulling out with the pliers, and then just setting the tab on there so I don't have to go searching for the holes.
Oh, cool. Putting the ribs in. Okay, this is a very, very tight fit. And again, another reason why doing the deburring ahead of time would have been even more helpful, just because it's so super duper tight trying to get these in there, and the rough edges can scratch on the inside of that tank skin. And so again, if those had all been smooth beforehand, I think there would have been less scratching and maybe slightly easier trying to wiggle them all into alignment. But it's a good way to make sure, again, that you got your fluting right, that the holes line up just right. But either way, it's kind of a tight fit trying to get the ribs like all the way in there. It is snug. Something else that was kind of helpful, if you can see, we've got one of our portable lights inside of the fuel tank right now there, and that just helped to light up where all the holes were when we're looking at it from the outside. So it was just kind of helpful for helping get all the holes between the ribs and the skin lined up there, since again, you can only really access it from the what's the top right now to get everything moved around. And so just having the light in there to help locate and align all the holes was helpful.
So on these holes at the bottom, these 1, 2, 3 holes, I had to kind of tilt the fuel tank backwards away from the edge of the table, because the bar for the crossbar here on the bottom of the stand was clashing with the drill. So I had to tilt it up and lift the fuel tank about a third of the way out of the stand in order to get my drill to be able to line up. As you can see here, I can't get my finger to have the proper perpendicular angle to that hole.
Yeah.
So if I lifted it up, it gave me freedom to get the drill at the right angle and drill all of these along the bottom.
So by lifting here, so where you saw, so it came
like
up.
Such.
Yeah, so now it's just sitting out of there a little bit.
Yeah, so it gives you a little more.
So now then you can go in and get those without
clashing with the wood.
Bar being in your way.
Correct.
All right, cool. Well, good to know. So again, you're putting everything here together to do your final drilling for the different pieces. And one thing I'm going to point out here in 18-4 step 3, where you are about to clico the tank baffle to the tank. As you can see right here, there is a single hole on one flange of the tank baffle that corresponds to a single extra hole on one side of the skin. So just make sure that you've got that lined up the right way, where you have the right flange on the right side of the skin. In step 6 on 18-4, you're countersinking the row of holes that attach the fuel tank skin to the baffle. You're going to end up, riveting that tank skin to the baffle. But please note that it does say that to assure proper part alignment on reassembly, that you're supposed to leave every 10th hole uncountersunk. So you're going to go back after the sealant's cured and everything's done, and then you're going to go and countersink these after the fact to then rivet them. So every 10th hole is supposed to be left not countersunk for the assembly with the Pro Seal. Here in step 8, so you've disassembled the tank, and now you're going to be machine countersinking the top of this lovely red anodized fuel cap flange to accept the dimples in the tank skin. The fuel cap flange is slightly curved so that it matches the curve in the top of that fuel tank skin. And so because of that bit of a curve and wanting to have everything sit like stable while doing the countersinking, I just got a bunch of different pieces here of the wood to put underneath it to support the different flat spots there on the bottom of the flange, because the bottom part's flat. It's the top part where it matches up to the skin where it's curved. So I just kind of staggered a bunch of different pieces of wood underneath along the flat bit to hold it nice and level and steady. And then I could easily then try to get the countersink cutter lined up there on the top to be flush to whichever part of that curve that I happen to be sitting on for countersinking that hole. Okay, so a couple things working here with the fuel tank. You have here, this is the tank cap and the flange. And then you have here the vent clip. And then you have here a little bushing. And so it doesn't quite put this in there that we've really seen. So I just kind of want to go over it really quick. So this came off when you were trimming some of the parts at the beginning on 18.1, and it's one of the little end bits. Now you're supposed to have it so that it sits here on the rear of the flange and that the holes line up. But in case you can't tell here, they do not. So you can see that it's not right. You see how there's a little bit of an edge here that doesn't, it won't let the holes line up. So you actually have to trim this, and it doesn't specifically say that in there, that you need to trim this down so that the hole lines up. So we've checked and done some research. You're supposed to trim this down so that it fits. The other thing is that when you look here in the book where it talks about installing it, if you look here, see how that hole there that's set on the bottom is definitely much larger. So you can see there's the itty bitty one for the rivet, but then you can see here, again, it's much larger hole underneath. And so looking ahead, you see this is on page 18.3, but then you have to flip to 18.6 to see here in figure 1 that these are the bushings then that you're gonna put in for the fuel vent line. And so you're supposed to have one of these bushings, this, here we go, SB437-4 is supposed to fit into, that's our little, vent clip here. So that's it there, see with the hole that we were looking at in the other page? So you have to then drill a hole into it that will accommodate this bushing fitting in there for the fuel vent line. So that seems like something that's gonna be a lot easier to cut it while it's all out here and we've got the pieces and I can clamp them down or put them in the vice grip or something to make sure that this fits. So just a couple of things there where, again, it wasn't really explicit in the directions, but having looked at it, you need to trim the vent clip T1008 and trim it so that it fits, so that the hole will line up there with the hole on the flange for the fuel cap. And then you need to cut the opposite hole. You need to drill it bigger so that it will accommodate this bushing, which is the SB437-4, which has a 1/4 inch inner diameter, and then I think it's a 7/16 inch outer diameter. So it has to be drilled so that it will actually be able to fit this bushing into the clip. Also here in step 8, in the third part there of step 8, where it's talking about dimpling holes, it says, do not dimple the 2 screw holes in the inboard edge of the T1001 left tank skin as shown on page 18-5, figure 3. Well, if you look at 18-5, figure 3, there's actually not just 2 screw holes, there's actually 4 screw holes that you can see here where it says do not dimple 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's pointing to 4. So I think that was just a typo there, because again, it's the instruction says don't dimple 2, but there's 4 on that figure that it references. So we made sure to leave all 4 not dimpled. A quick little reminder, if you enjoy my build videos, to please go to the link below, planelady.com/referral, and send that in to Vans if you decide to purchase your own empennage kit for any model of Vans aircraft. It doesn't cost you anything extra, but they will send me $100 as a thank you, and it means a lot to know you guys appreciate the work that goes into the videos. If you've sent one of those into Vans since January of 2021, would you mind sending me an email, please, to Christine@planelady.com? Thank you. All right, let's get back to the build. The next thing here in step 8 of 18-4 is it says, at this point, all parts of the fuel tank should be deburred, countersunk, and or dimpled. So that's not entirely accurate. For starters, there's already steps there on the very next page where it's telling you to do some more dimpling that has to get done, but there's also some parts that have been omitted from the instructions that just, I don't know if it's overlooked or whatnot, but there's I think I found 4 different things that need to be done that aren't specifically called out in the instructions. So one of them here is to dimple the T1003B for the, well, right or left there, for nut plates and the corresponding nut plates. So if you look at 18-5 figure 2, you're looking at the T1003B left there. And that wasn't called out to do anything on that part, but if you look, there are 5 nut plates, K1000-08 nut plates that you're going to be riveting on, and it says the rivets that you're to be using are AN 426 AD 3-3.5. So you need to dimple those holes for the nut plates to attach them, and then dimple the holes in the nut plates as well, in order to be able to use those rivets and attach them there to that part. The next one is to countersink the T1005-L. There in the figure 1 on 18-5, you have the T1005-L. You have quite a few holes along those flanges that are going to go behind the skin for the fuel tank. And so if you look at the corresponding holes where the T1005-L meets up with the skin, you're using, again, 426 rivets. You've now dimpled all of those holes in the skin per the instructions there. So you need to countersink the corresponding holes there in the flanges of the T1005-L in order for it to receive the dimpled holes in the skin. You also have to countersink the nut plate attach rivet holes in both flanges of the T1005 left and right. So if you're looking here at 18-5 figure 1, there are 3 nut plates that attach through the top flange of the T1005 left, as well as the T1005C shim, and then there's 2 nut plates that attach to the bottom flange of the T1005 left and the T1005B shim. Now there's 2 nut plates in step 4 that only attach through the T1005C shim, and in that instruction it says to dimple the corresponding nut plate attached rivet holes in the shim because the instructions call for you to use countersunk rivets. So based off of that, we dimpled the rest of the nut plate attached rivet holes in the 2 shims where you have those 5 other nut plates that attach, but then you have to now countersink the flanges for the T1005 left and right to now receive the dimpled nut plate attached rivet holes in both shims. So more countersinking to be done, but that allows you now to get those 5 nut plates attached. In step 4, it tells you to, step 4 of 18-5, it says to dimple the 2 number 19 holes in the shim that are going to have those K1100-08 nut plates attached. You're using a number 8 screw dimple die for those, just to specify. It's not there, and so in case you're wondering, that's the one you're using. And then in step 4, in that same instruction, where it's saying to dimple the 2 number 19 holes in the T1005B shim, it's actually the T1005C shim. Because, so the instruction there, it says, if you keep reading again, dimple the holes which will have the K1100-08 nut plates attached. Well, if you look again there at 18-5 figure 1, the only 2 K1100-08 nut plates are being attached to the T1005C, not T1005B. So that's just a typo there. You're going to be dimpling the holes in the T1005C shim. And I think that was all. I think those were the only things there that seem to be not like specifically called out or overlooked or little typos again or whatnot. But these are all good things, again, to make sure to do before you get started with the Pro Seal, because in particular, specifically countersinking the holes of the T1005 L, because if you've got everything going on the Pro Seal, you're not going to be able to get that part in there if you don't have it countersunk. It's not going to sit flush with the dimples there in the skin. So that's definitely the big one to make sure you have done before going to the Pro Seal. All right, and so I'm going to wrap up part 1 here. Originally, I had made this entire video that included the Pro Seal tips and tricks and things we learned and actually Pro Sealing the tanks in this video, but it turned out to be something like an hour long. So I've cut that part out. I'm going to make that a part 2 here that's just going to be covering the Pro Seal and Pro Sealing the tanks, and that will be coming out here shortly. There's a little bit still to finish up, and I think that this will work out much better having it chunked into these more digestible like 20-minute length videos instead of a giant like hour video. But thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to give me a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already done so for more videos like these and to follow along as we build our RV-10.